We followed the markers the whole way up, but on the way down, the trail we knew by heart didn't exist anymore. It was supposed to be an easy weekend, just me and Darren, 2 nights in the Green Mountains. We'd done trips like this for years. Pick a trail, set up camp, disconnect for a while. No phones, no distractions, just the woods, the trail, and time to breathe. This time, we chose a lesser-known path near Killington, one Darren had found on an old hiking forum. It wasn't on the main maps, but it was listed as lightly trafficked, with ridge views and primitive campsite. Sounded perfect. We signed in at the ranger station just after sunrise Saturday, tossed our gear on, and started climbing. The air was crisp, the leaves were in full color, and the trail was exactly what we'd hoped for, rugged but clear. Tree markers painted every 100 yards or so, and not a soul in sight. The climb took most of the day. By the time we reached the ridge where we planned to camp, the sun was low behind the hills, throwing long shadows across the ground. We pitched our tents side by side, boiled water for freeze-dried chili, and sat near the fire, talking about nothing important. Plans, work, life, the usual. It got cold fast after sunset, but we were used to that. I woke up sometime after 3 a.m. to a soft crunching outside, something moving in the brush, slow steps. I listened, eyes wide open in the dark, heart suddenly aware of how far we were from anything. But I didn't wake. Darren could have been a raccoon, maybe a deer. When the noise stopped, I fell back asleep. The next morning, we packed up with the same rhythm we always had: coffee, tent breakdown, gear check. We were both in good spirits, ready for a calm descent. The weather was still holding, sky bright, and we figured we'd be back at the ranger station by late afternoon. That didn't happen at first. It was subtle. The trees looked a little off. We passed a section that neither of us remembered hiking up the day before. Darren joked that we were just tired, and that uphill trails always look different coming down. I agreed. It made sense. But the trail markers were gone. Those bright yellow blazes we'd followed all the way up weren't there. We scanned trees, rocks, everything. Nothing. No signs, no mileage posts, just woods. That's when things started feeling wrong. We checked the map. GPS showed us in the middle of a green expanse. No trails marked. Useless. We tried to retrace steps, followed a slope we thought we recognized, but it led us into thicker underbrush. I told Darren to stop. We stood still and listened. Silence. Not birds, not wind, not even the buzz of insects, just nothing. The kind of silence that makes your skin feel too tight. We picked a direction and started moving again, slowly, methodically. But no matter how far we walked, nothing looked familiar. The terrain felt repetitive. Same fallen log, same split tree stump. We laughed nervously about déjà vu, but inside, we both knew it wasn't a joke. It wasn't long before we came across something that confirmed it. Our boot prints, mine and Darren's, side by side in the mud, except they were heading toward us. We stood over them for a full minute, not speaking. I felt cold all over, like the air had shifted. Darren finally said, "We've looped." But that didn't make sense. We'd walked straight, no turns, no backtracking. The terrain didn't even slope the same way now, and yet there they were. We tried turning around, hiked back the way we'd just come. This time, we passed a stream we were sure hadn't been there earlier. It was shallow, but fast-moving, and the water was oddly clear. We followed it for a bit, thinking it would lead us somewhere, but it eventually just thinned out and vanished into the rocks. By now it was mid-afternoon. The light had shifted, casting long shadows between the trees. We were eating trail mix in silence when Darren said, "What if we're not on the same trail anymore?" I didn't know how to answer that. Eventually, we came across a sign, or what used to be one. It was metal, bent and almost overtaken by moss, nailed crookedly to a tree. You could barely read the letters. Something like Southridge, and a faded arrow pointing down a steep, narrow path. We hadn't seen that sign on the way up. I didn't want to follow it. My gut said no, but night was coming fast, and neither of us wanted to camp again, not out here. So we went down. The trail was barely a trail, just loose soil and overgrowth. Trees closed in tighter, and the deeper we went, the darker it felt. Like the sunlight couldn't quite reach the floor. We didn't speak, didn't need to. Every snap of a twig underfoot made me flinch. My nerves were stretched thin, heart pounding every time I thought I saw movement ahead. And then, all at once, we were out. We stepped through a clearing and found ourselves standing on a gravel road. It was wide and flat, lined by trees on either side. No signs, no trailhead, just a wooden post with a crooked, hand-painted sign nailed to it, "private." No other markings, no fence, just that word. We stood there in silence for a while, adjusting to the open space, breathing in the cold air like it was the first time we'd felt safe all day. About 20 minutes later, we heard a vehicle approaching. It was a forest maintenance truck, orange cab, dusty windshield. The guy inside looked surprised to see us. He rolled down the window, squinted, and asked where the hell we'd come from. We told him. The Ridge Trail, South Slope, camped overnight. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at us. Then he said, "That trail hasn't been open in decades. Washed out years ago. Nobody hikes that anymore." We offered to show him on the map. He waved it off. Said he'd give us a ride to the station and we could talk to the ranger there. The ranger took our names, our info, and didn't ask too many questions, just looked tired. Said he'd note it in the log. That was it. Darren and I didn't talk much on the drive home. We both had nightmares that week. Trees, loops, the sound of something moving just outside the tent. We've gone on a few hikes since then, but only the well-marked ones, state parks, family trails, nothing remote, and we don't talk about that trip anymore, because no matter how we try to explain it, we both know we were never supposed to find that trail. He never spoke. He just stood off trail, watching us from the trees. My brother Josh and I used to hike together all the time when we were younger, but life had pulled us in different directions. I was training for a trail marathon and needed the elevation. He was burning out at his job and wanted to unplug for a while. It felt like the perfect chance to reconnect 2 nights through Olympic National Forest. Light packs, a long loop trail that circled Lake Esperance. We started early Saturday morning. The trail was beautiful, moss-draped evergreens, mist rolling in low over the ground, everything quiet in a way that felt sacred. Not silence, exactly, but something deeper. The kind of hush that makes you lower your voice without thinking. We passed a few other hikers near the start, but the farther we went, the more alone we became. That was the idea. By late afternoon, we were deep in the forest, far past the usual day hiking crowd. That's when I saw him for the first time. I was filling my water bottle from a stream, and when I looked up, just beyond the trees on the opposite side, I saw someone standing there. A man, very still, wearing a faded yellow jacket, the kind with a rain hood, old-looking and too big for him. He didn't wave or move, just stood partially behind a tree, like he didn't want to be seen, but also didn't care if he was. I blinked, and he was still there. But when I glanced back at Josh and looked again, he was gone. I didn't say anything. I figured it was just another hiker heading the opposite way. It wasn't that strange. The color had just caught me off guard, standing out so sharply against the green. But I saw him again an hour later, farther along, higher up the trail, this time on our side of the path, maybe 60 feet into the woods. Same posture, same yellow jacket. Watching us, I froze, but when I turned to point him out to Josh, he was gone again. No footsteps, no movement, just vanished. That night, we set up camp near a clearing. The fog had lifted just enough for us to see the stars, and for a while, everything felt normal. We cooked some dehydrated meals, talked around the tiny fire, and tried to convince ourselves we weren't sore. I kept thinking about that guy in the woods, but I didn't bring it up. It felt paranoid, like I'd be giving him more power by naming it. But Josh saw him, to dot, around 10 p.m. We were getting ready to turn in when Josh suddenly stopped mid-sentence. I followed his gaze across the clearing. There he was, the man in the yellow jacket, standing just beyond the tree line, about 50 yards away, still watching. The firelight barely reached him, but I could see his shape, a tall figure, hood up, one arm hanging stiff at his side. We both stood there, frozen. Then Josh grabbed the flashlight and shone it at him. The beam hit the trees, but didn't quite reach. He didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't do anything. "Hey," Josh called out. "You okay?" "Nothing." He stepped forward, but the second he did, the figure turned and walked, not ran, just walked into the woods, vanishing behind a wall of branches like he'd never been there. That was enough for us. We packed up fast. No real conversation, just the quiet urgency of people who know better than to second-guess their instincts. We hit the trail again, moving by headlamp, knowing we had at least 10 miles until we were back near the trailhead. The forest looks different at night, smaller and bigger at the same time. Sounds feel closer. Even your own breathing starts to seem unfamiliar. About an hour in, we found something strange. A scarf, old and frayed, tied carefully around the limb of a sapling. It was red, faded to near pink, and fluttering slightly in the still air. We hadn't passed it on the way up. Josh tugged on it, like he wasn't sure it was real. It came away easily, like it had just been tied minutes before. We left it there and kept walking, faster now. Half an hour later, we passed a rusted lighter, one of those flip-top kinds, sitting dead center on a mossy log, perfectly upright. It was out of place in a way that made my skin crawl. Not dropped, placed then. We found the notebook, just lying in the dirt off the side of the path. A small black moleskin. I picked it up without thinking, flipping through the pages. Most were blank, but near the middle, I found a name written in all caps, jagged handwriting across a half-torn page. Lina, my name, just that. No last name, no notes, nothing else on the page. I stopped walking. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked. But Josh looked just as pale as I felt. I handed it to him. His fingers lingered on the page for a moment, then closed the cover slowly. We didn't say a word after that, just kept moving. The rest of the hike was a blur. We didn't stop to rest, didn't pause for water. We didn't even speak. The trail twisted and looped in ways I didn't remember from the map, and for hours it felt like we were walking in circles. But finally, just after dawn, we saw the wooden trailhead sign peeking through the fog. We made it back, exhausted, dirty, shaking. There was a small ranger station near the parking lot, and we stumbled in like castaways. I told the ranger everything. The man, the notebook, the lighter. She nodded politely, took the notebook, and said they'd file a report. No one matching his description was registered on the trail that weekend. She didn't seem surprised. Josh and I drove home in silence. I stared out the window, most of the way unable to shake the image of that man's posture, his stillness, the way he didn't react, didn't need to react, like we'd already done exactly what he wanted. The notebook was never returned. We never got a follow-up call. I still hike. Not often, and never that deep anymore. And never without someone else. But even on local trails, when the trees are thick and the light shifts just right, I catch glimpses. A yellow blur between the trunks, a shape that disappears when I blink. I don't chase it. I don't stop. And I never wear red on the trail anymore. The screams didn't echo like they should have. They just stopped mid-air, like the forest swallowed them. I've spent most of my adult life out in the wild. As a wildlife photographer, you get used to silence, to isolation, to strange sounds. At night, that no one else hears. You learn to tune your senses to what's normal. The rhythm of branches creaking, owls calling, wind moving through high brush. That's why I noticed it so quickly when things in that valley started to feel wrong. It was early fall when I went into the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. There's a protected area there, no official trails, no rangers patrolling regularly. Locals call it Lost Man's Hollow. I didn't know that when I planned the trip. To me, it was just a blank spot on the map with a rumored waterfall tucked deep inside. No cell signal for miles, but I was prepared. I always am. I hiked in solo with a week's worth of supplies and enough camera gear to weigh down a mule. The first night was uneventful. Cool air, distant coyotes, silence that settled over everything like a weighted blanket. The second night changed everything. I'd set up camp beneath a granite outcrop not far from the falls. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a scream. It wasn't an animal. I know what coyotes sound like. This wasn't that. This was a human voice, high, sharp, desperate. It rang out once, piercing the dark. Then it stopped. Not faded, just stopped. Like something clamped down on the sound itself. I sat up fast, heart pounding, and grabbed my flashlight. I scanned the trees. Nothing. I didn't move from the tent. I just waited, every muscle on edge, listening for the scream again. But there was only silence. I told myself it might have been a trick of acoustics, a hiker on a distant ridge whose voice carried strangely through the canyon. But even as I rationalized it, I knew it had sounded close. Too close. In the morning, I packed up. I told myself I'd seen enough. I'd captured what I came for. I didn't want to admit the truth that I felt uneasy in a way I never had before. I needed to leave. The hike out should have been straightforward. I'd marked everything. GPS still had power, and the weather was holding. But the deeper I moved through the valley, the stranger it became. First, it was the sounds. There was no birdsong, no rustling leaves, just this dense, unnatural quiet. When I clapped my hands out of frustration at one point, nothing, no echo. Like the sound had been pulled down into the dirt. I tested it again, shouting toward a cliff wall. Nothing came back. No reverb, no feedback, just flat air. That was when I noticed the rustling. Not leaves, not animals. It was too steady, too rhythmic. Like someone pacing just behind the trees, staying out of sight. I spun around several times. Nothing. I started walking faster. Then I caught something in my periphery movement. A flicker of motion, low to the ground. But every time I turned to face it, it was gone. I told myself I was being paranoid. That the scream had shaken me more than I realized. That the wind and light were playing tricks on me. But I didn't believe it. Late that afternoon, I stumbled across something wedged beneath a boulder near a dried creek bed. At first, I thought it was trash, but it was an old sleeping bag, mildewed, torn open along one seam. I didn't want to touch it. I almost kept walking, but something caught my eye. A small notebook, half buried in dirt, beside it. I pulled it free. It was soggy, pages stuck together, mold growing along the spine. Most of the entries were illegible, just smeared ink and warped paper. But near the end, one page was still readable. The handwriting was shaky, frantic. Only one sentence stood out. If you hear them, don't speak. They answer back. That's when I heard it again, the rustling. Louder now, closer. I snapped the notebook shut, stuffed it in my pack, and started moving. I didn't stop. For the next 6 hours, I didn't stop. The trail twisted and bent in ways I didn't remember. Sections I had walked just 2 days earlier felt completely foreign. At one point, I saw a tree with claw marks on it, deep, ragged gouges that looked fresh, too fresh. The sun dropped fast behind the ridgeline. I switched to my headlamp and didn't look anywhere but the trail ahead. I felt watched, not chased, not hunted, just observed. Like someone was keeping pace beside me, but staying out of view. My camera gear bounced against my side, heavy and useless. I didn't care. I just needed to get out. It was full dark when I reached the ranger station. I must have looked like a mess. Dirt up my arms, dried blood on my shin from where I'd fallen earlier, face pale. One of the rangers, older guy, graybeard.com demeanor, asked if I was okay. I handed him the notebook. He started flipping through it slowly. Most of it was unreadable, like I'd expected. But then he stopped, his brow furrowed. He held up the back page, tapped the corner. Did you see this name? He asked. I looked. It was faint, tucked into the edge of the inside cover. It matched a missing hiker. Young woman, early 30s, vanished 3 years earlier in the same valley. No body, no gear, no trace, until now. The ranger didn't say much after that, just made a note, kept the notebook, thanked me for bringing it in. I went straight to my truck. That night, I deleted every audio file from my camera, not the photos. Those I could handle. Trees, rocks, empty forest. Nothing strange, but the audio. It was all static. Even in the footage from that morning, when I remembered birds chirping, leaves crunching, all I could hear on playback was a low hum, like a dead frequency. I couldn't bear to listen. Past the first few seconds, I never published those photos, never mentioned the trip in my portfolio. I told people I'd come back empty-handed. Weather didn't cooperate, camera malfunctioned. The truth is, I came back with something I don't understand, and I've never gone near a mountain valley since.